I decided to change the system, but I had forgotten one thing: the deep-seated fear etched into the heart of every student and every teacher. Hello, friends. You are listening to The School Principal, Part 15, written by Jalal Al-e Ahmad.
We were gradually preparing for the second term exams. I hadn't intervened in the first term. Since I had just arrived, I was afraid I might become two mothers. But now, it was necessary for me to supervise and see how they were making the children sweat. Besides, we had to hand the children over to the New Ruse holidays with their report cards in hand. To enter the new year, they certainly needed a record of their actions from the previous year, or at least a report card for 2/3 of their school year. So, in early SFAND, I called the teachers one day, and in a sort of council we held, I abruptly told them the story of a former colleague of mine who would run a fever for 2 days whenever she gave a perfect score. She was a history teacher, taught from 1st to 3rd grade of high school, was young, and had attended teachers' college. But none of that changed the situation, and every morning when we saw she wasn't feeling well, we understood that she must have been forced to give a perfect score again the day before. Of course, the teachers laughed. I felt encouraged and told the story of a cleric who, in our childhood, was our religion teacher and would give grades from under his abba. His hand trembled so much that the abba shook, and it took a full 10 minutes for him to finish. And he would give even the best students a 12 at most, as if he were giving birth to the grade. And of course, they laughed again. This time, it annoyed me. I set aside the humor and made them understand that it wouldn't be a bad idea to consult on designing the exam questions, and that I am at your service for any assistance, and so on.
Then we discussed the 6th graders, assessing how many of them we could put forward for the final exam and what we could do to reduce the failure rate and things like that. And from the following Saturday, the exams began. Exactly from the second half of SFAND. 3 of us would review the questions: myself, the teacher of each class, and the disciplinarian, to ensure no injustice or negligence had occurred. Then we would ring the bell and head to the hall. Since we have gotten a barbell, they had written Sports Association on its door. The tough guys had multiplied on its doors and walls, and in one corner, 2 broken down tables were placed, piled with the children's handicrafts, and beneath the table lay the heavy corpse of the barbell, clinging to the ground like a crab. The handicrafts included small cardboard cabinets decorated with colorful paper flowers, wooden tables and chairs that weren't even smooth enough for dolls, inlaid frames made of plywood, and an Eiffel Tower that wasn't even 2.5 handspans tall, with a top resembling the minarets of the Shah Mosque, and a map of Iran with holes drilled where the cities were located. And for all this junk, how much fret saw had been consumed, how many times hands had been cut, how much money from father's pockets, and how many arguments at home. And for what? To get a higher grade in handicrafts. These days are no longer ancient times. Now, even the ministers of culture admit that these names, formulas, traditions, and memorizations won't occupy any part of the children's idle future lives. So inevitably, every child must learn a skill in school: artistic, technical, industrial, so that if nothing comes of framed pictures and scraps of paper, and no desk is empty, no one will starve to death. So what could be better than handicrafts? Long live shoebox and pastry cardboard! Especially if every child has a father who can bring home a bundle every night. And even longer live the colorful oil papers at 1 abasi per sheet. Glue isn't more than a penny per sur. Or something like that. And they import fret saws by the ton, like pins, porcelain toilets, water pipes, foreign enemas, and 1,000 other junk items. Out of every 1,000, even if one of them can open a frame-making or inlay shop, or trade their fret saw for a hacksaw and French wrenches, then God bless the fathers of culture with their handicrafts, which have increased the business of corner apothecaries and their discipline grades and their confusing rights with lefts, and borders and lakes and the exports of Abyssinia. And with their sports and penmanship practice. In the old days when we studied, we only had sports and penmanship as the mortar for other subjects.
And how fortunate are the children of this era, who have handicrafts too, civic education too, and best of all, they have discipline grades too, which are in the hands of school principals and require neither lessons nor midnight oil. You just need to know how to keep your head down and toe the line and be deaf and dumb, and learn manners from the mannerless, and contentment enriches a man. And aren't all these things progress? For the children, for culture, and especially for principals.
Another step toward the autonomy of principals.
When I encountered these things, I began to believe I had a very important job, just like a minister. Even higher than a minister. It never even crossed my mind that you could just sit and give grades to people's children like that, and especially the discipline grade, which is a grade like all other grades. Like grades for important subjects such as history, religion, and math. And based on criteria like whether 3 months ago so-and-so hid behind your door and sniffled quietly or loudly, or whether yesterday when talking to the disciplinarian they kept their head down or not. Let the teachers go and struggle and strain the brains of people's children with their knowledge, and then during exams have a scapegoat like you, the principal, and you, just like a minister, shut your door and encapsulate each child's personality with all their tastes and talents and lack thereof into a discipline grade as a number floating in the air on paper, and then send the report card to the parents, who read it with excitement, show it to others, and boast that they have a well-behaved child with a discipline grade of 20. What an important job you have, isn't it? Before every written exam in the hall, I would hold a meeting for the children, telling them that fear of the teacher and exams is baseless, and they must have self-confidence, and the teacher is very kind, and similar nonsense. But did anyone listen? As soon as they entered, they would rush to the corners of the hall like a storm, unbelievable, to places out of sight, as if seeking refuge, trembling with fear. Once they were so much so that I felt they actually enjoyed the fear. They encouraged themselves by being afraid. Very few were those who sat on the front benches and set their books aside themselves. Even if you weren't a teacher or principal, you could easily guess who had arrangements with whom and who would sit next to whom. They helped each other. They took refuge in each other and hid in each other's shadow. They separated from their notebooks 1 minute later. Can one face an exam alone, all alone? A couple of times I tried to stand over one of them to see what they were writing. But they became so anxious, and their hands trembled so much that they stopped writing, and what handwriting? What handwriting?
No wonder all offices need typists. I don't know what their penmanship teacher was doing then. Though it wasn't his fault either. One could guess that one-to-men fountain pens weren't blameless in this matter either. They craned their necks to see from each other's papers. They forgot themselves, let alone their memorizations. Even if they knew the answer to the question, they still struggled. They forgot or doubted. And what was the exam question anyway? 3 cows give so much milk per day in total. The first gives twice as much as the second, and the second gives 1.5 times as much as the third. Determine how much each gives per day. Or, the duties of children toward their parents. Or, the rivers of China, and such absurdities. And what terror! I saw that these future men would be so terrified in these classes and exams, and would so fill their brains and nerves with horror, that by the time they got their diplomas or degrees, they would become a completely new type of person. People filled with horror, a sack of fear and anxiety. When you're a teacher, you don't notice these things, because you're the adversary. You have to be a principal, that is, stand on the sidelines and watch this daily, monthly alignment of teacher and student to understand what a diploma or degree means.
It means certifying that the holder of this certificate has been under the pressure of fear 4 or 10 times a year for 12 or 15 years, and that their driving force is fear and fear alone. This way, I couldn't last more than a day. Because I realized I couldn't have a childlike heart to understand and sympathize with the children's fear and horror. 10 years of teaching and giving grades of 8, 10, and 11 had hardened my heart. So, despite all the preparations I had made, I gave up supervising the exams and took refuge in my room again. Let come what may. In the end, some would win and some would lose. Besides, the teachers were right too. When they were children and went to school, they must have been beaten. So now they had to beat. And if the switches were broken, they had to beat with grades. This cycle isn't so small and within your reach that you can break it somewhere, in a school, or in a class, or in an exam. That's how I gradually realized
I couldn't even be a school principal.
The next part of this story will be uploaded tomorrow. What you will hear in the next episode: a split-second decision made by a school principal about one student didn't just change a boy's future. It forever shattered the principal's own illusion of justice. Looking for entertainment? On this channel, we share Iranian poems, stories, and podcasts in different languages for you. If you are interested in Iranian literature, culture, and tales, this is the best place for you.